Hey there all you handsome bastards and classy ladies, and I hope you are all doing well. Now, there was a bigger gap between my last video and this video than I had intended. Again, apologies for that, guys. What ended up happening was, this ended up being a far busier month than I ever expected. I completely forgot that I had to go away for an entire weekend for a stag. Work is an absolute shit show. And I'm also kind of pretty much broke for the month because it all worked out to be far more expensive than I thought. All the same, as promised, I am back and I'm going to be trying to do more videos like this as we go. Probably more conversational type ones until I actually get my my hotpog set up and running. And then we can make a glorious return to the days of Let's Plays and video game walkthroughs. So in my last video, I asked you all what kind of video content would you like to see from me. And I actually got some great suggestions from people. I have to say thank you all. It was so good to see such an instant snap response from you. I loved that. I really did. And the first one that I got from anybody, I cannot remember who it was exactly who asked for this, and I'm not logged into my Gmail account right now, so I can't remember, but I'm going to try and put it in the video description down below. But somebody asked me, how do I write my stories? And seeing as that was the first one that I got, and that's a topic that is actually very close to my own heart, I thought that I would do that video for you first, just to kind of get the ball rolling. Also, it's something completely different to anything that I've ever done on my channel. Now, before I begin, I do need to give you a quick disclaimer. I am not a professional writer. I have so far in my entire life published one chapter of one book that I'm working on Amazon. You should go ahead and download it. It's available for $1. And so yeah, I'm not going to pretend to speak with any massive authority on this, but what I can give you is my experience and my techniques that I use when I'm writing my stories, because I've written a lot. I'm just not a published writer, if you get what I mean. But all the same, I think there's some good advice that can be in there, and hopefully you guys get something out of this as well. Before I get started on the techniques, though, I am going to plug my book just a little bit. For those of you who don't know, I'm gradually writing a book chapter by chapter, kind of a serialized kind of a format, and I'm releasing it on Amazon. It is called Gods and Ashen Ones. Chapter 1 is up for grabs for $1. It'll follow the story of Rook and Kars Cade. I don't think I included their last names in the chapter, but their last names are Cade. And they are two con men who end up crossing the wrong man after they pull off a very successful con, and well, things go south pretty quickly. Chapter 2 is going to be released in a few days. I'm actually hoping it's possible by the time I have this video edited and uploaded that it's already released on Amazon. If that's the case, I'll link it down below. I'm going to follow the same format that I did in the last chapter, which is that it'll be free for 5 days. You guys were absolute troopers for downloading it during that week, and I can not thank you all enough. You're amazing. I say that a lot, but it can never be said enough. You're incredible. So I'll have that up for download for free. I really would appreciate it if you could give it a read, give it a download, maybe give it a rating or a review if you feel so inclined. Please don't do it if you don't feel it deserves it, but if you think it does, if you enjoyed it, please do give me a review. I need to hear the feedback. And I'm also going to start gradually naming characters after you guys as sort of as an homage for all the support that you've shown me. And nothing bad will happen to those characters for the most part. Chapter 2 follows new characters. It follows Kedrick Lorestone, the third youngest son of the Emperor. Just goes to a war council. You get a bit of an idea about his family dynamics, get a bit to know a bit about him himself. And for the second half of it, you get to meet the big bad himself, Marix, the self-proclaimed god, and his right hand, as they go to town on a city called Revellon. And yeah, you get a little bit more of an insight into what they're doing, but they're not nice people. But as far as I'm concerned, they're my favorite characters to write. But yeah, so check that out. I want the villains to be at the front and center of the story. I always hated how most stories in fantasy, you have the villain kind of tucked away and they're only there every so often, and you never fully, really, truly understand what they're doing. Whereas I want the villains to kind of be there, that you're interacting with them, and I hope that you kind of see where they're coming from, even if you don't agree with the methods. Anyways, how I write my stories. Let's get into that. But first, sit back, relax, throw your feet up, enjoy this video, give it a like if you liked the content. Leave me know in the comments if you thought it was useful or helpful, or maybe if you're writing something yourself and you might want my opinion on it. By all means, I mean, slap it on a Google Doc, share it with thetrueirongamer@gmail.com. I'd be more than happy to take a look at it. Like I said, I'm not a professional writer by any means, but I'm always happy to help and give my advice where I can. Anyways, enough time wasted. So, how do I write my stories? This isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all thing that works for everybody, but this is how I do it. So I'm going to break this video into kind of chunks. So chunk number 1, the first part, is structure. So how do I organize myself? So once I know what I'm writing, or if I have an idea in my head, what I like to do is I go to Google Drive, I create a folder, and the first folder is going to be the name of the story. So for Gods and Ashen Ones, I have a folder called Gods and Ashen Ones. When you click into that folder, I like to break it down into different areas. So I'll have one folder for characters, one folder for lore or world notes. Just if I have a random thought that I think would be a cool bit of the world, I add it in there just so I have a bit of the history of the world in my mind, and you can make little references to it as you go. And I also have a section for just chapters or drafts. Before I start writing a chapter, I create a Google Doc and I have an outline. It's just called, like, say, chapter 2 plot outline. And I just make bullet points on what do I want to have come across in this chapter. What characters do I want introduced? What are those characters doing? And what are the main points that I want the reader to kind of take away? Just so that, I mean, I like a bit of waffle. I'm not going to lie. I like a bit of filler and a bit of world building in my stories. But at the same time, it's very important that if you're writing, that you are pushing the story forward in some shape or form. So you need to have, well, you don't need to. For me, as I write, I need to have a bit of a structured outline. I don't want it to be too stringent. I don't plan it like paragraph by paragraph, but I have my broad strokes of what I want to have happen in that story. Be it character introductions, character outroductions if they're dying, and maybe just getting across something about the world, about character motivations, something about the economy, something going on in another part of the story, like maybe a little reference to that. Just those little bits. But that helps me then when I sit down to write. That helps me get it across in my head. What I do then is I have one master doc called manuscript, so Gods and Ashen One's manuscript, but then every chapter has its own separate Google Doc. So I write out the chapters individually, and then when I'm happy and I consider that chapter complete, I then paste it into my manuscript, so I have the entire story as a whole. Because someday what I would love to do is publish the actual story as one fully formed book. That's my end goal. That is it really in terms of like the actual structure of what I do. Basically just get organized. Have a folder and then split that folder into little folders for different aspects of your writing. I mainly just have characters, lore and world building, and plot outlines. I like to try and keep it simple and organized. So, how do you start writing? That is a fantastic question. So anytime I've ever started writing a story, it's come to me in a few ways. You could literally have an idea. You could have one sentence in your head, or literally one image will pop into your head and you'll think, it's actually kind of cool. And what I recommend doing when you have that moment where you're like, yeah, this is something I could actually write about. I think this could be a cool story. Even though you only have like one frame in your head, start writing. Write that frame down, write that scene down, write that one thing down, and then just start writing. And here's the important bit when you're writing, right? Because I know a lot of people are natural perfectionists. Do not try and be perfect. There's some writer, I can't remember who he is, but it's a quote that he said about writing, which is the first draft of everything is terrible. I have a feeling it might have been Oscar Wilde, but I'm not sure. I can't remember who it was. Or maybe Ernest Hemingway or something like that. I don't remember. It could also be somebody like not nearly as reputable as that, but who knows. But they said it's true though. The first draft of everything is generally terrible. It's going to be sloppily written. There might be grammar errors. You might contradict something later on in that story that you had said earlier. That's all part of the process. The important bit is don't be afraid to write badly. Just belt out a draft. You'd be surprised when you're writing badly and just keep going. You should generally, hopefully, ideally, get a good flood of ideas coming into your head. And as you're doing that, just write them down. You can refine it afterwards. You can go back and you can make a new doc or whatever, a new word sheet or whatever way you prefer to write. And then, based on what you learned from your bad draft, you can refine it and write it out a bit better, a bit more structured. Characters will be more consistent. The plot makes a bit more sense, or the timeline is ironed out a bit better. But yeah, the important bit is do not be afraid to write badly. That is incredibly important. The other thing, characters. Okay, so the bit that I struggle with the most, being completely honest with you, is I have characters in my head. And in my head, they are all individuals. They all look and behave and talk certain ways. The difficult bit then can be when you are writing the dialogue and having the characters seem different. So what I recommend you do, right, when you're writing your characters, and this is why I like having a separate folder entirely dedicated to my characters, is start writing about them. Even if you're writing down details that is never ever going to show up in the story, make it unnecessary. Like for Rook, I don't know if I'll tie it into the story, right? But Rook is one of my main characters in Gods and Ashen Ones, and as far as I'm concerned, he can play the violin extremely well, but he doesn't actually like playing it. His favorite instrument is the piano, but he's terrible at playing the piano. He can't do it. He loves playing chess. He likes it because it's kind of going into like a bit of his background in spoiler territory, so I won't say it yet, but he took the name Rook because he loves playing chess, and the reason why he loves playing chess is linked to the bit of his past that he can remember. That bit, to be fair, I will be referencing in the story, but it's just a little detail, you know. Sure, his name is Rook, but it's tied to a bit of his character. He chose that name for himself because he likes chess. And I mean, like, it could be their favorite color. It could be that they like fishing. Rook likes fishing, by the way. I don't know if that's ever going to be part of the story, but he likes fishing. Mainly because I like fishing, so I thought I'd make it part of his character. But before you start writing the characters in a story, just have a doc and just write about the characters. Get to know your characters. That way then, if you've established their background and their history, it becomes a lot easier to decide how they talk, how they speak, how they interact with people. What are the things in the story that would piss them off? What are the things that they would be indifferent to? What are the things that they might approve of that somebody else might not approve of at all? You know, it just lets you flesh out the characters in your head. So flesh out your characters with unnecessary details, because if you look at any human being that you know, we are a collection of experiences and memories and quirky traits, and you never truly know somebody else, you know. There's so much to a person, so much complexity that you never see all of it, even though they could be your best friend, they could be your wife, they could be your parent, they could be your sibling, yet you never know everything about them. So write your characters the same way. Write it that you have so much detail that there's a good chance the readers will never know everything about them. But you do, and that affects how they are. Now, while we're on the topic of characters, one thing that has to be important is a character can never... You don't want your character to end the story the same way that they began. They're going to have some character growth. So it's... A part of this does need to be organic. In my writing style, a lot of my writing is organic. I have a rough outline of what I want to do, and then I see what happens when I start writing. But it really is helpful to have an idea in your head of where the character is going to begin and where they're going to end, and then try and map out the events that shape them. How do they get there? What happens in between? If you have somebody who is incredibly shy and incredibly soft, and by the end you want them to be a hardened commander, what happens to get them there? Do they experience the loss of friends or soldiers? Do they witness an absolute military massacre? Do they see another commander being an absolute dickhole to their soldiers and step in and confront them? Is that what drives them? You know, just kind of map out their milestones from A to B. You don't want it to be a sudden, like, one scene shift where they become a completely different person. It's a lot better to see a character grow. Think about your favorite stories, be it a TV show, a book, or anything like that, and think about your favorite characters, and odds are you love those characters because you followed them on their journey of how they changed from when you first met them to becoming something even better by the end. But I would recommend mapping that out. Knowing that in advance is important. The next thing is stakes. Your story needs to have stakes. Sweet, delicious steak, well done with pepper cream sauce and some mushrooms and onions underneath. Those kind of steaks. But yeah, your story does need to have stakes. There needs to be a bit of a risk. For the reader to be interested in what's going on, there has to be this element that your characters are in danger. Not necessarily physical danger. Maybe they've got a secret that could be found out. Maybe they're racing against the clock. It could be anything at all. But there has to be something in the story for your characters to lose. Because that gets the readers far more invested in it. Because if they really like the characters and they care for them, but they know that there's something that can happen that your character is really going to miss, that there's a risk involved for them. Maybe their life is at risk. Maybe it's something that they really truly care about is at risk, and you don't want to see them be devastated by that loss. It could be anything. So long as your story has some risk tied to your characters and tied to your main plot, that is going to hook your readers far better. The other important thing that I think, especially if you're writing something in this kind of sci-fi or fantasy genre, when you're writing something fictional based in the real world, coming up with your setting is a lot easier. Generally speaking, I actually struggle writing fiction. I struggle writing stories based in the real world, because my issue with that is when you're writing something in the real world, you are confined by the rules of the real world. So you can't suddenly just drop new locations in there. You can't suddenly dictate what the economy and the local government is like. You are bound by the real world. Which is why I tend to write fantasy and sci-fi. I like being able to make my own worlds, making my own rules, making my own economies. How do armies function? I love having complete control over the world that I'm building, as opposed to shaping my story around the world as it already is. But the important thing is to have a setting. So if you are doing something in the fantasy genre, say for example, as much as you can, shape out the world in your head. It is really difficult to actually get that world across to your readers in writing, because visually you might be able to see all these locations in your head, but you need to describe them to other people for them to see them in their head. And that's kind of tough to do off the cuff. I'm not saying go and do like a J.R.R. Tolkien on it and like write a ridiculous amount of maps. And that man went into so much detail with his world building. It is actually exemplary. But do make sure that you have your setting mapped out in your head. Again, there has to be an element of organic growth to it, where you do shape the environment to it. What I would recommend, right, and some of the best settings that I've ever seen in anything that I've ever read, there are the environments and the settings. You know, there are some writers that have the setting and the environment work as a tool for the narrative. So depending on what the narrative needs to have happen, the world bends and shapes to that. Whereas I always love it when you read a story and the world feels like this lived-in place, like this is how the world is, and the story is taking place in it. Sure, because it's fantasy and you made the world, you've bent it a little bit to suit your narrative, but it's so important to have your setting feel like an actual world, like an actual place, where like if you plucked your characters out of it and your characters were never there, the world would function as is, you know? So I like to go, depending on what's going on, I like to go into a bit of detail. I like to go into the economics of it. I like to go into the layout of the land around it. I don't draw maps or anything like that. It's more so in my head, and then I'll kind of describe it in a Word doc. But make sure you have your setting. And finally, I think the important bit is you need to have a good villain. Every good protagonist needs their antagonist. The antagonist doesn't need to be a person. It can be an actual physical obstacle. It could be addiction, say, for example, if you're going for something a bit more grounded in reality. You could be telling a story about a man struggling, or a woman struggling with alcoholism. And in which case, alcoholism and alcohol, that's your villain. You know, that's their temptation. But they need to have this conflicting party that they're kind of up against. I think every story, just about every story when you think about it, has that element where there is this opposing force. But flesh that out. And like I said, when it comes to fantasy stories, in my case, in Gods and Ashen Ones, the villain is a man named Marix. He's proclaimed himself to be God. The scary thing about him is he could actually maybe possibly be telling the truth based on, you know, physical evidence. And he is a physical threat. But he's my favorite character out of the entire thing, purely because I'm the kind of guy who loves a nicely designed villain. Not nicely designed. I'm not saying Marix is nicely designed or that I'm a great writer or anything like that. I hope you guys find that he is and that you find him interesting. But take Thanos from Infinity War. The best thing about Thanos is that, yeah, he's a dick, and I'm not going to go into spoilers, but he does some pretty nasty things in Infinity War. But the scary thing about Thanos is he actually explains why. He's not twirling his mustache and like, I'm going to destroy the world. He actually has a logic to what he's doing, and you can see why he's doing it, even if you don't quite agree. And if you're writing a villain, I think that's super important. I read a trilogy recently called The First Law. Absolutely great trilogy. I would recommend it to anybody. My main issue with it is, in The First Law, they talk about these two villains. There is... oh man, I forget one of them. He has his 100 words. I can't remember him, but they refer to him as being this big bad prophet. And he's coming, you know, one of those kind of guys. And then there's another guy who is a king of the he's the king in the kind of like Jon Snow, the king of the north. But he's the king of these kind of like wild barbarian kind of guys. And like one of the main characters, Logan Ninefingers, he's like, yeah, this man, fuck, he's a scary dude, you know. He's the one man who could control me. He's the cause of all of the suffering in my life. And the story builds these guys up so much. And I think they both only appear in 1 or 2 chapters and with minimum dialogue. So they're built up and they're really interesting because they're off screen and you never really know so much about them, but you want to. And then they show up and then they're gone. And that's kind of it. And I found that really disappointing. So make sure if you're going to do a villain, I would encourage you to flesh them out. By all means, it can be unseen if you like, but flesh them out. So to summarize, I'm not sure if this was really helpful, but in terms of physical structure to writing a story, what I recommend doing is get organized and get writing and write badly. I mean, literally just start spouting nonsense. Another bit of advice that I give you is a good writing exercise is write with somebody else. Myself and my dad, I actually recently, from talking to my dad about writing, I actually discovered, and it's actually been fantastic because me and him have actually gotten, we were already close anyway, but we've gotten so much closer now. I told him that, I'd love to be a writer. And so I've started writing a book. And then I realized, and I never knew this about him, he also loves writing and he would also love to have a book published. So what he did was he sent me a message on WhatsApp and it was just one sentence. And he's like, let's see where the story goes. So he sent me one sentence and then I sent him a sentence back. And then he sent me a couple of sentences back. And then I sent him a paragraph. And then he sent me a huge fucking WhatsApp of like a story. All of a sudden, like, bam, stuff's happening. And then I sent him one back. And then we moved it over to email. And before you know it, we're actually in the middle of writing an entire story together, So if in doubt, if you're finding that you're struggling on the creative side of things, by all means, recruit a friend, start writing something together and let it be something as random as one sentence and see where that takes you. So yeah, get organized, but keep it simple. Flesh out your characters with unnecessary detail, even if your readers never see them. Make sure you have your world and your setting plotted out in your head as well. Again, loose detail, don't confine yourself, but have it in your head. Have stakes in your story, super important. Everybody loves a good juicy stake. Have a good villain, be it a physical villain, a personal internal villain, an addiction, whatever it may be, but have a villain. And the most important thing that I can give you guys, the best piece of advice that I can give you is have fun. Be passionate about it. Writing is actually one of my favorite things to do, especially since I started doing it, especially since I actually published the first chapter on Amazon. I feel like I got a bit of momentum and now I feel like I need to kind of keep it going. But have fun with it. Writing is a difficult, grueling process. You will reread your stuff and think, my God, this is shit. And then somebody else could read it and say, this is great, And be open to criticism and be ready for the fact that not everybody's going to like your story. It is genuinely impossible to have everybody be happy with everything that you do. Not everything is to everybody's taste. So be ready for that as well. And be okay with that is what I would say. Be okay with the criticism. I've had some nasty comments leveled at me in my YouTube videos, but I've had far much nicer ones, And that's okay. My videos aren't for everybody. My personality isn't for everybody, but you need to be okay with that. You need to be comfortable in your own skin and realize that despite the fact that it's not for everybody, the people who do enjoy it, be so grateful for those people. I'm incredibly grateful for you guys. So yeah, that's my advice. And just get writing. And like I said earlier, if you want, by all means, if you ever want my opinion, send something on to me. Share a Google Doc on with me. I'd be more than happy to do it. It's great for me anyway to just kind of get involved and see other people's stories and random writing exercises and stuff, because it gets me thinking as well, and it kind of makes me see things that I never thought that I would. And yeah, and like I said, chapter 2 of Gods and Ashen Ones is called The Brink of War. You get to see a war council, you get to see a bit of the imperial kind of bureaucracy, get an idea of what their military structure is like. You get to meet Kedrick, who's going to be a main character. There's no Rook or Kars. You'll be reunited with the two of them at the beginning of chapter 3. But yeah, this one's all about Kedrick, the Lorestone family, his brothers, his dad, his mom. That's the first half, and then the second half you get to see Marix and his right hand go to town on a city, and you get a bit of a glimpse as to what he's up to and what he's doing. And that is it from me, guys. I've never done a video like this. If you do have any questions that I didn't address in this video, let me know. Please do let me know, and I'll be more than happy to answer them for you in the comments. In the meantime, thank you for watching. Stay tuned. I've got a Horizon Zero Dawn lore video in the works as well, so I hope to get that uploaded within a few days after this one. And yeah, keep the suggestions coming. Email me at thetrueirongamer@gmail.com with any ideas that you have for videos, and I'll be more than happy to work my way through that list bit by bit. And yeah, thank you all for listening, and I love you all.